against you in the court of public opinion. All right, we are on page 38 in the English translation. We have just finished a long discussion last week we had a long discussion about the difference between what it means to know that something exists and know what that thing is. And we explained that about God, it's only really possible to know that He exists. It's not really possible to know really what He is, right? And this really applies, everybody agrees on this principle. This is according to the Kabbalah and according to the Rambam. Everyone agrees on this principle that God, you can know that He exists, but you cannot know what He is. Okay. So let us continue now. We're going to continue talking about the difference between, we're still on the topic of the difference between das and emunah, about knowledge and faith. Let's actually go back. Let's do this from the bottom of page 39, so we have a good running start here. The middle of page 39, where we say L'chein nemar echze. The verse therefore uses the term. It's the fourth line on page 39. Yeah, the verse therefore uses the term echze. That's why we say we're saying there's a difference between knowing and seeing. When the Torah says seeing, it normally means seeing normally refers to the deep comprehension of the Creator, as opposed knowing, in other words, knowing what He is, rather than knowing. The term knowing is only hasagas hametzias, is only knowing that something exists. Seeing is knowing what it is. Knowing means what it exists. So that's why it says echze, right? From my flesh I see God, but it says see in Aramaic, not in Lashon HaKodesh, not in the original Hebrew, implying that this isn't a true sight. That even when we use our flesh to see God, we don't really know what it is, right? As we explained in the analog, what does it mean in Kabbalah? From my flesh I see God. It means that from the world we can understand the holy world of Atzilus. We can understand godliness, right? As we mentioned many, many times. Like from the sweet apple, you understand chesed and kindness of Atzilus. When you do that, what you understand is that Atzilus exists. You don't really understand what it is you're talking about. And no matter how much you learn from the world, you cannot really grasp what that is in a way of true knowledge. And that's why it says echze. It says you can only know it's in the Aramaic, not in the real Lashon HaKodesh. Because if we say in Lashon HaKodesh, in the Holy Tongue, that you can know something, it means you know what it is, not just that it is.
Does it say anywhere that it's in Aramaic?
Yeah, echze.
Because echze is also in the Lashon HaKodesh. Chazon Ovadia.
Echze targum. L'chein nemar echze targum.
Okay.
But it says, I don't know. Yeah, I know, Chazon Yeshaya, it's interesting. I don't know. We're saying Targum, I don't really know the details. I wish I did. I wish I did know that. It's an interesting question, because it is found in Tanakh multiple times. Right. Okay. The Acharaim Shalariyah, it's the translation of the Acharaim of the site. It's not the true site. We're on page 39, Spencer, and we're sort of starting with the end of what we did last week. So too is the explanation of the verse that you have been shown to know. So the question is, which one is it? Is it seeing or is it knowing, right? Seeing is knowing what God is. And knowing is only knowing that God is, right? So what the verse is saying is that this idea that Hashem is Elokim, you can literally, you can know this literally, and it's as true to a person as if he saw it literally. Because that which a person does not understand, even though a person doesn't understand, this doesn't make it any weaker or change the strength of the veracity of what a person knows, right? That's why the verse says you have been shown to know that Hashem is Elokim. It's not that you see it. It's not that you know Hashem is Elokim like intimately, that you really know what that is. Rather, it's that you know that it's true, but you know it's strong as if you see it. You know it as strong as if you see it. And the point is that the fact that something is true is not affected at all by whether you know what it is or not. That's the point. The point is that since you know that, the fact that you know that God exists is not weakened at all by the idea that you do not have a personal or a deep understanding of what God is. The two things are separate. The veracity of something, the truth of it, that this thing is real, is unaffected by whether or not you have a deep understanding of its nature.
But what is the difference between, Hashem and Elokim?
No, it's a whole other, not for now. It's not for now. It's a whole other thing. It's a whole thing. It's two different levels or two different aspects of godliness. Good evening. As is explained at length above from the example of the soul, our example of the soul, that a person knows that his soul exists with absolute certainty, even though he doesn't know what it actually is. And in fact, we explained, he doesn't even know the way in which it informs his interacts with his body. Never mind not knowing what the soul actually is in its pure sense, what the soul is unto itself. You don't even know how it interacts with the body, how it descends to interact with the physical world. So too with God, even though you don't know what He is, you can know that He is for certain. Okay, now what we're doing now, we're moving on to new territory now. Ella, shebasagas mahus alikuz yatanug atzam manifla ein kates v'tachlis. If you truly grasp the essence of godliness, this would be a great and wondrous pleasure without limit and without end. If you could actually know God, not in the sense of that He exists, but if you could know what He is, the experience of that would be an experience of an endless pleasure. Kihu makar hatanugim, because He is the source of all pleasure. V'zui mailas hanavim, and this is what the prophets achieved. Shenemar behem v'yorei elav avaya, that Hashem appeared to him. And in the future it will be revealed to us, which answers Ronnie's question from last week. In the future, this level, this great pleasure of knowing God will be revealed to us. Just as an aside, in the Rambam's understanding, that is what the pleasure of the world to come is, or the joy of Gan Eden, the pleasures of the Garden of Eden that the soul experiences after passing away, is the pleasure of understanding God. That is the pleasure that a person experiences there. Chassidus and Kabbalah would say it's the pleasure of experiencing elokus, of experiencing godliness. The Rambam would say it has to do with knowing, it has to do with understanding God, understanding Him intellectually. Kamashakasuv v'roch chol basar, as it says in Yeshayahu, as it says in Isaiah, and all flesh shall see. Ayin ba'ayin yiro k'noda, with their own eyes they will see, as is known. So in the time of Mashiach, this is going to be revealed to everyone, what God is. Nevertheless, anyone who contemplates it can delight with great, wondrous, and all-encompassing pleasure. It's a good translation. In other words, even though this is really something that's for prophets and that will be revealed in the times of Mashiach, and now it's impossible to truly know what God is, nevertheless, anybody that focuses on what we do know, from that God is, in other words, from the little bit of the external knowledge of God that we do have, this will bring, a contemplation of this will bring anyone to a great and wondrous pleasure. B'yediyah zu. Through this knowledge. What knowledge? That a person should picture or should form in his mind Hashem's unity, Hashem's oneness. Even though he does not understand His nature. For example, just as a wealthy man is joyous from the treasure of pearls which are hidden away and are in his possession, even though he doesn't see it with his eyes at every moment. As it says in Tanya, chapter 33. Okay, so the wealthy man doesn't have joy from his wealth because he sees it at every moment. It's not the actual grasping and sort of the intimate knowledge of his wealth, that it's before his eyes at every moment, that brings him joy. That could also bring a person joy, but it's the idea that a person has it, the knowledge that it exists, even when it's not before his eyes. This too can bring him great joy. This too can be a great pleasure. That even though it's not in front of your eyes, you know that you have in your possession this great wealth. So too, with the joy that a person gets from the knowledge that God is, that a person can contemplate in his mind, even though he doesn't know what God is, he can contemplate God's unity, which generally speaking, we'll probably speak about this more in future classes, but generally speaking, when Chassidus says God's unity, it doesn't mean God's unity within himself, it means God's unity with the world. You contemplate how the entire world is completely nullified and has no independent existence from God whatsoever. And this brings a person a great joy, because even though he doesn't know what the world is completely subjugated to, nullified within, he doesn't know what God is in an intimate understanding. Nevertheless, he does know that God is, and thinking about the unity of God and the way that the world is unified with the Creator is like knowing that you have wealth, even though you can't see it before your eyes. You know that it's true, even if you have no personal experience of it, and this can bring a person great joy. As is explained in Tanya, chapter 33, Das, knowledge, intellectual or understanding, is what's called in Zohar, it's called in the Kabbalah, the key which includes 6. The key that includes 6. Dahainu, what does that mean? Shu pnimius hamidus. Das is the inner aspect of the midas, of the 6 emotional traits, right? We know in the Kabbalah there are 6 emotional traits. There's chesed, gvura, tiferes, netzach, hod, and yesod. There's 6. Those are the 6. Those are what they're known as zaz, they're anpin. They're known as they're known as the midas. They're known as the emotional qualities of the soul. And the inner aspect of all of these things, which means to say, everything in Kabbalah, at every spiritual level, really everything in creation, has 3 aspects. We've spoken about this before. It has what the thing itself is. It has its beginning, which is really its source, and from where it receives its life. And it has its end, which is where to whom it gives its life, how it gives over to the next level, or gives over to the lower thing. So the inner aspect of the midas, which means to say, where do the midas, where do the emotional qualities all get their life from? What gives birth to the emotions? It's actually referred to as the mother, which we're probably going to mention. What actually gives birth to all of the emotions? It's das. It's this knowledge. It's this. Bina is called the ein. Bina is called the mother, but it's intellect in general. It's das. The intellect gives birth to the emotions, and das specifically. Das is the as we know from I'm sure you know if you've attended a Tanya class. Das is the aspect of the intellect which connects intellect with emotion. In other words, if you understand something, let's say you have a concept, and you understand it with your right, we know there's 3 parts of the intellect. There's Chochmah, Bina, and Das, which are normally translated as wisdom, understanding, and knowledge, and I don't know why. I don't know why those are the translations exactly. But if you understand something with Chochmah and Bina, but you don't understand it with Das, and then all of a sudden you come to an understanding in Das, how much intellectual understanding have you added up to the thing?
Nothing.
The answer is none. Das is not anything to do with intellectual understanding. The full intellectual understanding of a subject can be done is through Chachma and Bina together. That's the full intellectual understanding. So what's Das then? And why is it part of the intellect? Das is that aspect of the intellect which makes the theoretical intellectual work of Chachma and Bina real to the person. It's the go-between between the intellect and the emotions. It unites what is a purely intellectual matter and an emotional matter. So in other words, you can understand about how the world is totally nullified to godliness and has no independent existence from Hashem. You can understand that very well as an intellectual matter, but to actually make that real to you is a different matter entirely. You can learn your whole life and have it only be theoretical, right? Das, which means, like as we said before, das is knowing, like Adam nu Chava is an intimate. That's why I've been translating it as an intimate knowledge. An intimate knowledge. This thing is real to you. It's very real. It's a certain unity with the thing. The thing has become integrated into your worldview in the real sense, not just intellectually as a theory, but this is a true reality to me, which is really all true intellect should really theoretically be brought down that way. That this is not just something which it's possible to understand, but if this is true, then it should become part of my worldview. It should become part of my world. It should be part of my reality. So this intimate knowledge is called the key that includes 6 because it gives birth to the emotions. In other words, just in the simplest understanding. Well, let's see what it says before I come with my own understanding. So let's be wise for a change. As we see, the emotions are nullified to and are drawn after the das, are drawn after the understanding, right? Like, for example,
understanding is something that's actionable.
Yeah, it's non-theoretical. In other words, you can take the example that leaps to mind is often the most controversial example possible, right? So take climate change, right? And there's some people that believe this is an apocalyptic situation, and there's some people that believe. When I say believe, I mean they have an intellectual framework that leads them to the conclusion that it's not an apocalyptic situation, right? There's some sort of debate. I'm not getting into the legitimacy of either side. At least there's some sort of controversy over the matter. Now the question is now some of the people. There's people that have das on both sides, right? There's people in the middle. The people in the middle can contemplate the entire matter theoretically, and they won't panic or feel anything either way because the whole matter's in theory, right? But as you know, there are people on both sides that have come to a das understanding of the matter. There are people who are in the more apocalyptic end who are actually terrified of what can happen from climate change, and justifiably so, right? If that's where their intellect leads them, and if that's true. And there are other people who are led in the opposite direction intellectually, also have das, who feel absolutely zero, have absolutely zero emotional connection to the matter whatsoever. In other words, for something to come into midas, for something to come into emotions, for you to either feel drawn towards something or to feel repulsed by it, it has to be real within your worldview. If it's not real within your worldview, why do the people who don't panic not panic? Because it's not real for them. It's not a real concern, right? It's like some people say, if you knew the inner workings of the government, or for that matter, if you knew even the inner workings of the kitchen, you would be totally terrified or repulsed or disgusted or something, right? It's the knowledge. Ignorance is bliss. The knowledge, the das, which makes the theoretical intellectual possibility into part of your worldview, and that leads directly to emotions. If you understand the thing and you have an intimate knowledge of it, then you have the opportunity to feel about it one way or the other. When a person knows and feels himself.
So was God telling Adam to avoid the tree of knowledge, or was it the tree of understanding?
We actually spoke about that in our previous classes. The whole thing with the tree of knowledge and what it meant that he now knew good and evil. Suffice it to say that good and evil, as we understand it, and knowing good and evil in his way, can be explained as a negative thing, as we explained in the previous class. We can't go back into that now. But suffice it to say, the knowledge of good and evil, even the knowledge of good, was seen as a descent from the position of Adam and Eve, as explained in our Kuntrasamayan classes.
Was it Bina or was it Das?
Das, that's the tree of das, tree of knowledge, intimate knowledge. So for example, this is the example that Tzemach Tzedek gives, which is probably better than my example, and by probably I mean definitely. When a person knows and feels himself. In other words, a person is very self-aware is the wrong word, because self-aware has different connotations. A person is very aware of their own existence. They're not caught up in something, right? It's not like a person's distracted reading a book. A person is settled within himself. I am aware that I am here now. You might say he's present, right? He's aware of his own existence in this moment right now, right? We see that when that because he feels himself and his own vitality and his own life force, he feels himself to be in existence, as he is very emotionally moved. To love the good and to hate the evil. More than a person is affected when he doesn't feel himself to such an extent. Like he's preoccupied, he's busy with some great matter. That's when a person doesn't feel himself as much, right? The classic example is like maybe it's the wrong example. You could say something like the absent-minded professor, someone who's always busy and in a different world and thinking about different things, or someone, or even a businessman, someone who's caught up in very important matters. They don't feel themselves. They're totally lost. They're totally lost in their thought and in whatever they're busy with, and they don't feel their emotions as strongly, as opposed to a person who's present and who's here right now. Whatever is happening impacts them in an emotional way. Much more. They're much more open to that. And we're saying it's because of das. It's because of knowledge. A person is the occurrences that are happening to cause these emotions are much more real to him. They're much more part of his reality when he's present, and therefore he feels more emotions. We find that the emotions are dragged after the das, after knowledge, after intimate knowledge, which is feeling, which is this feeling of being within oneself, as we said before. Let's do footnote 16. Tzemach Tzedek is referring to situations where people, be they Torah scholars or secular thinkers, for example, mathematicians, physicists, or economists, will be preoccupied with an issue of substance which absorbs their attention entirely while they are working on it. They don't eat or sleep normally as long as their minds are wrapped up in the idea. At that time, they are not concerned with their own feelings. It's not because they have become refined and have elevated their characters beyond self-concern. It's simply their minds are elsewhere and their attention is not focused on their personal self. So in other words, emotions, when you finish a long project and then you realize that you haven't eaten for 7 hours or 8 hours, when a person really gets into something, right? That's because your das has come back to yourself. Your das, your reality, what's real to you right now, is returned back to yourself. You become real to yourself again, as opposed to the thing that you were caught up in before. So this is the demonstration of the Tzemach Tzedek, that the emotions a person feels, whether he's drawn to things or he's repulsed from things, all of this follows his intellect. All of this follows his das. Nikra mafteach l'shisha midas. Therefore, it's called the key to the 6 midas. Achagas nehi chesed gvur tveres netzach v'edin yesed. Command mafteach shepetech is pilus hamida, because it's a key which opens or which activates the emotion. And you can either arouse and inflame the emotion by focusing on it and by paying attention to that reality, or you can remove your attention and quiet the emotions. In other words, the emotions are fundamentally controllable, right? This is what it says in Tanya, that the brain has natural dominance over the heart. Not as something that a person has to learn, but rather this is human nature. In every human being, the brain naturally has dominance over the heart. It's something that a person has to practice maybe to know how to do it, but the brain rules over the heart. Where the mind goes, the emotions follow. So you can either focus on something and make it more real. You can make it more real to yourself with your das, and that brings up the emotions, or you can remove your das from it entirely, which is called hesach hadas, which is actually a halachic term. You can stop paying attention to it, and the emotions fade. V'sharsha nimshach mecharayim d'yesed ima. And we have Kabbalah stuff. It's very exciting for some of our class members. Its source is drawn from the acharayim of Yesod ima. K'man shenesbar la'el shelagabe asagas hamahus enei ela b'chinas acharayim bilvad. And this das is drawn from the hind part of Yesod Ima, the Yesod of Yesod Shebabina, and it's from the hind part of Yesod Shebabina. Don't ask questions. And as we said before, that with regards to actually grasping what God is, this is only an outer aspect. This knowledge is not the thing itself. Shurak Yediyas HaMetzias Levad, it's only knowing that God exists. Lefi Shekach Ha'avanu Hu Lahavin Mahus Hadavar. And since understanding is an understanding for what things are, therefore, the knowledge that God exists is only the outer aspect of knowledge. In other words, what we're saying is that knowledge by nature is to know what something is. Right? I've been saying it's intimate knowledge, right? So what's intimate knowledge with something that cannot be known intimately? You have the hinder part. It's a sort of knowledge that can't really be called knowledge. You're using knowledge for something that cannot really be grasped by knowledge, right? It's like trying to see sound or something like that. At some level, there's some way in which it's possible, and we can do it to some extent. But the das, true das, is not really of this thing. So therefore, this das, which we call knowledge, the knowledge of God, which is not really possible, knowing what God is in a true and intimate way, that the true reality of God as He is should be known intimately, is impossible. So the das that we do have of God, what we do know, is really the knowledge that He exists, and this is not true das. The knowledge that something exists is not das as it's really meant to be. Das as it's meant to be, what das is made for, is to know the thing intimately. This is what it means to see God, but to see God in this only through the translation. It's the lower form of seeing God. Right? You can know that He exists, and it's not really true knowledge, but as Tzedek said, nevertheless, this itself can still bring a person great joy.
When you take the sentence, Ata hereta ladat, it's Ata hereta, you shown a way to the dat, to know. But you didn't show it, and the dat doesn't know it, but you showed a way. Well,
the way we explained it before is that the reason why it says Ata hereta is because you can know it in such a way that it's so real to you, it's as if you really knew it. That's how we explained it before.
Right. Sort of going in the goal would be to go in the other direction, back to Bina and to Chachma, because if you have knowledge, it's not visceral, right? What you really want is a deeper understanding.
Right. The problem is that that's really even the deeper root of the problem. Das, in other words, the way we're using das is not as independent from Chachma and Bina, but rather as the summation of Chachma and Bina, right? If you have a true Chachma and Bina of something, then you're able to attach it to yourself and to have the visceral, the intimate knowledge. Right? The whole problem here is that you can't have the Chachma and Bina. That's the whole problem. If you could have the Chachma and Bina, the Das would be, so to speak, an afterthought, in a way. Right? Here, like with anything else, right? Like using the climate change example. Once you have the deep Chachma and Bina, the Das is not so hard. Right? If you really know it, right, there is something which gets in the way, which is called Pareh. It's called Pharaoh in Chassidus. Pharaoh, which is Osias Ha'iref. The Ha'iref means the nape of the neck. It's the back of the neck. It sits in between the brain and the heart. And the of Pharaoh, the negative power of Pharaoh is to prevent what you know from using das to affect your emotions. That you can know that something's true and still you can know that God is real and still act against it. So that's a different thing. But barring the influence of Pharaoh, barring the influence of that negative state, of that negative power, Das is sort of like an afterthought. The problem here is that you can't really know God Himself, even purely intellectually, even theoretically, you can't know God. That's the point here. Das is merely the summation of the Chachma and Bina. It's the transferal of Chachma and Bina into our personal reality, which exists in our midas, in our emotions. Man is fundamentally emotional. Man's a weird amalgam. Yeah.
So is it a fundamental goal to expand our knowledge, or to somehow find a way to the understanding?
I would say both. That we know God through negative comparison and through His actions. We know, so to speak, and from that way of knowing, we can then transfer that into an intimate knowledge, into feeling, into the visceral experience. So that's knowledge. Amnam ha'emuna, but as opposed to faith, he hanikras atara b'sfarim. This is what is called, faith is called the crown. Faith is referred to as the crown. Ki kamashal atara, because just as the crown, harash merely sits above the head, but does not enter into the head, right? It's something which sits on top of the head. And the emotions are not affected from it because it exists at a distance. That's why emunah is called crown, because it doesn't exist within the mind. It doesn't exist within the mind to come down to the heart. The crown is distant from the heart. It's not even within the head. There's no real true connection between the crown and a crown that sits on your head and your heart.
Crown has no keter?
Yeah, crown, keter, Torah. Yeah, similar idea. So what's the idea here? We spoke about this before when we spoke about knowledge and faith in a couple of our previous classes, but the idea is that we explained why we need faith and why we need knowledge. And one of the reasons why is because faith does not affect the person in an inner way. In a sense, right? In a sense, because faith is not knowledge, and knowledge is the key to all of a person's emotions, therefore it almost follows like a syllogism, almost logically, that faith cannot affect your emotions, right? We say faith begins where knowledge ends, right? We've spoken about this a few times before. That faith is faith is the connection a person can have to those truths which are beyond the intellect. And this connection does not affect the emotions, because the emotions go after a person's knowledge, right? This is the example I gave in a previous class that the Alter Rebbe brings, that Ganva fum machtar to Rahmana Karya, that the thief prays to God for the success of his thieving. This is the example of the faith which doesn't enter into the heart, that a person has a super-rational connection to God. When we say super rational, we simply mean that it's not part of his world. God you can have a connection to God, but God is not part of your visceral reality. God doesn't change who you are. God is not a factor. God's not real like money is real. Right? Money is real. God is not real. There's a famous vort from Rabbi Mendel Futterfass, from the famous Chassid, who he once said it for Brengen, that everything that we say in Chassidus, and he went through everything, all the different worlds and levels in Seder Shtalshus, the different aspects of the soul, and the 10 spheres, and the 10 spheres in each of the 4 spiritual worlds. You would go up, you go from Asiya to Yetzira to Bria to Atzilus, and all of the different aspects, and Keser and Oren Sof. All of these words we use, they're just an analogy. They're only a mashal. We don't really know what these things are. It's just an analogy. We use analogous terms. And you know what the analog is? You know what it's all an analogy for? It's all an analogy for money. That's what Mendel Futterfass said, right? What's the idea? The idea is that if God is as real to you as money, you're in a very, very good spot, right? The Mendel Futterfass was criticizing his fellow Hasidim, if I'm not mistaken. I think he was saying that for some Hasidim they can learn all the Hasidus, but what's their real God? The real God is money. Right, that they sit and learn all these holy books and holy concepts, but it's not real to them, like the bottom line, right? Like the bottom line on the invoice, right? This is the famous story with Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan from the Gemara was on his deathbed, and his students asked him for a blessing. He said, "I bless you. You should fear God like you fear man." And they said, "Kule hai, is that all? Like that doesn't seem it's not much of a blessing. We should fear God as much as we fear men." And Rabbi Yochanan said that, if you're embarrassed to sin in front of other men, but you're not embarrassed to sin before God, that means you don't fear God as much as men. A person who fears God as much as men never comes to sin, right? God is as real to him as men are. That's das. That's what it means to really have das in God. Emunah is not like that. A person's connection to God, before he reaches that deep and intimate understanding that God's reality is absolutely apparent to him, until he reaches that, his connection to God is really to an extent through emunah. And emunah is not an inner thing. Emunah is not about affecting the world of the person. So on the contrary, if it was graspable within the person's world, it wouldn't be able to attach at the other end, right? Emunah is something which attaches the human on one end to something totally super rational on the other. And if that could really lead to an emotion, that would mean that it's not really attaching to the highest aspect of godliness, right? You can't have both, right? The whole point is, as I explained in our class that we did outside of the text, is that emunah attaches you to an aspect of godliness which is not within the world. It attaches you to something which is totally beyond comprehension. It's an aspect of godliness that was not invested within the creation, right? It remained separate from the world. So if there's something that connects you to that, but it could still, but how could you expect that thing to be real within your world? Right? It's like a contradiction in terms when you really understand what you're saying. Emunah is not bepnimius. Emunah, by its nature, faith, by its nature, is not an inner thing. It's not an inner thing which changes which we use as our reality. Faith is more of an external thing to the person. That's why it's called the crown. See, I don't even know why I bother. Therefore, a thief who is in the tunnel calls upon God. It says in Ein Yaakov at the end of Brachos, that the thief in the tunnel says, Hashem, save me, Master of the world, save me. He believes, not just believes in God, he believes in God's ability to save him. He believes God's involved in the world, right? It's not just he believes in an impersonal creator, he's praying to him. He's praying, change the outcome, save me, make this theft successful. Nevertheless, he does an action which rebels against the king. Why? Because faith is an external thing to the person. Faith, it does not change the person's reality. Faith is external to that to the person's calculus on what to do. A person's emotions, what a person is drawn to or repelled from, is not affected by faith. But rather only through knowledge. As we say, which knowledge is the key, as we said before. So faith, though able to connect to aspects of godliness, though the vessel for connecting a person with godliness beyond what's invested within the world, the downside, so to speak, is that you then can't expect that godliness to affect the person's reality. You can't expect that godliness to be real to the person. Das, on the other hand, is more practical. True das, which is to know intimately, cannot grasp the godliness which is beyond the world. True das only grasps what's within the world, and even when it grasps what's within the world, it can't really understand what God is. It only really understands what He isn't, right? It's like echse. It's not even a real das, but the advantage of this subpar das, not even this true intimate knowledge of God, the advantage is that it changes a person. The advantage of the das is that it can actually change, it makes you not just a thief who prays to God, it makes you not a thief. That's the difference. That's the difference. Okay, let's switch copies. Let's gather all these and we'll switch to the new ones. Hopefully I did this correctly and we'll have this page. Let me see here.
You have that in?
Oh yeah. Quite a few pages, okay. Yeah, so we're on page 44 in the new ones. You got the new copies? These are the old ones. Let's gather the old copies. Please pass the old copies.
Where are the new copies? Yes, here?
Yeah, that big pile, the big pile. Yeah. And we're on page 44 and 45 in the new copies. Everybody got a new copy?
You need the extension.
Okay. All right. We are on page 44 in the new copies. Right, at the bottom of page 44. See if we can. I don't know if we'll be able to. We'll see if we can finish
You staple them the other way, backwards.
Whoops.
No, that's all right.
Backwards how?
No, okay.
Did I staple them backwards?
This is all the Hebrew together, and then I see it.
Yeah. Nachon. Okay, we're on page 44. So too it is understood above. Now we're on page 47. And the page numbering works a little interestingly, but yeah, we're on page 47. 47. Shebechinas nehi deza meichin lenukva. That the nehi netzach and yesed of za. We're doing more Kabbalah. Don't panic. Meichin lenukva. Are the intellectual aspect of nukva, the intellectual aspect of bina. Don't worry if we don't understand what this means.